So, who would like to start today? Does anyone have a conversation they'd like to have? A question you'd like to ask? All of your microphones are off, so if you'd like to speak, remember to turn your microphone on first. Something I often forget to do. I start talking and then I notice the microphone is off. So, and just to remind you, turn your microphone on.
Rishi.
Hello, James.
Well, it's great to see you, as always.
Yes. Om Namah Shivaya.
Shivan. Thank you for that wonderful talk. Um, I just wanted to reflect on something from the reading from the Ashtavakra Gita. The very beginning of it, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
The very beginning of it warned against the poison of the senses. And then, which I think probably is a phrase most of us cannot relate to very well. And then later on, it said something that was almost the opposite, which was something like, I don't remember it exactly, but all things flow in you and you flow in all things. And of course, all things would include the senses and the sense objects. And this kind of reminds me of this, seems almost like there's two aspects or two ways of looking at the spiritual process, which on the surface can seem to be contradictory. One is the poison of the senses, in the sense that that teaching, what I think it's really pointing at is not so much, if you take it literally, it's almost like you're at war with yourself because your senses are part of the appearance of the body mind. But I think it's pointing to the fact that we need to sift, so to speak, sift consciousness out from the objects that appear within consciousness.
Yes.
On the other hand, though, there's this movement towards embracing all the objects that appear within consciousness as none other than manifestations of consciousness, or perhaps even none other than consciousness itself. So there is ultimately no separation between, the poison of the senses and the consciousness that precedes and supersedes the senses. And sometimes in myself, I feel a bit of a dichotomy between these things. And the very use of those different phrases in that teaching would kind of pointed to that a little bit. So I just wondered if you could say something about that.
Yes. Thank you, James. Yeah, I appreciate you pointing out that dichotomy because that actually exists in all of the teaching. It exists in the Buddha's teaching as well, and it's the Ramana's teaching and Shankara's teaching. So you get these kinds of, like you say, they almost seem in opposition to one another, but in truth, they are not in opposition to one another because it is not, in fact, the senses or the world or the mm, consequence of having a body, which is the barrier, if you will, to understanding the truth of your own nature, who you are as awakened being, consciousness and bliss. The barrier is not the physical um, senses themselves or the fact that we have them or that they operate quite naturally in the field of objects, and that this natural awareness is also awakened awareness. The teachings make this very clear. This is why Sahaja Samadhi is declared as different from Nirvikalpa and Sivakalpa Samadhi, because the natural state of awareness, as you said, includes all of this in its own nature. So what's really being pointed to when something as described in this way as the poison. It's not the physical uh, fact that we have senses and that there are objects and that the attention and the energy flows back and forth within those objects and through those sense doors. So then what is the true poison? The poison that's being pointed toward here or alluded to, you might say, is identification with the activity of the senses. We know from our own experience that the reason we suffer, if you will, from the activity of the senses is because we attach to that activity. We attach to it either in the sense that because it is pleasant in our initial experiences of the senses in a particular way, we then become a seeker of pleasure through that particular sense, whether it be taste, touch, smell, makes no difference. Mind, that particular sense, when we become enamored of that, we identify with it. And then we pursue the momentary pleasure that's associated with it. At this point, as with all things, it becomes a poison. You know, we love the taste of sweets, huh? But if we live on nothing but sweets, we destroy the body. So that which initially brought us pleasure now sets about destroying us. So this is the nature of the poison of the senses. So you're pointing toward how we, over time, we learn to sort of filter in some way. We're not actually filtering consciousness, we're filtering identification, and we are regulating it in a certain way and controlling it. And this has become a great misunderstanding in many, many spiritual lives, in many, many spiritual paths, that somehow that because we become the masters, if you will, of choice, as we learn to master our own ability to choose what is wholesome, what is effective, what is useful in our spiritual life, that somehow this means that we need to externally control the senses and so on, and that we need to suppress and deny our existence in the body and in the world. This is absolutely a misunderstanding. The true understanding is that we learn what is regulatory, what is wholesome for us, what is useful to us, what supports awakening, what keeps us in the space of being, consciousness, and bliss. And that we do this only until we've understood that we are free and we are that nature of being, consciousness, and bliss. Because from that perspective, there's no identification left with what is occurring in the mind and the body, right? There's no one left to identify with the difficulties of the poison, if you will, as he's pointing out, of the senses. So at that point, what difference does it make? But in the interim, and this is why almost always when you read through any kind of scripture or teaching, you find these kinds of descriptions as he has in this passage, early in the passage, because this is an early stage of beginning to explore what is useful, what is helpful in terms of my understanding myself to be freedom itself, loving, joy, happiness, being, consciousness, and bliss. So in the beginning, some regulation, as you said, some filtering through of the senses. And this is as simple as knowing that if you eat too much candy, you get a bellyache. So in the same way, certain kinds of thinking normally associated with too much thinking about the past, too much thinking projecting into the future, this will give you a mental bellyache, and you will stop understanding that you are being, consciousness, and bliss. You won't be able to see it in that instance. It will be veiled. This veiling quality is a quality that's spoken about in scripture, um, and it's a acknowledged quality of the mind. So if we feed the mind too much sweet too often, it becomes a poison. So this is what he's referring to here. But he doesn't want to leave us there. So he continues on, and he goes on to say, everything within and without is this bliss, is this love, is this joy. So once you've put down all of your habits of mind, body, and world, and there is no longer a you that needs to be supported, if you will, by identification, through identification with thinking patterns, with habit patterns in the mind, with habit patterns in emotion, with habit patterns in body. Once that you has dissolved, been allowed to just be set free in the here and now, to rest as awareness itself, then it becomes unnecessary to describe the senses as poisonous in any way. They are simply functioning in the field of consciousness. And they do that quite naturally in a non addictive and non habitual way. So, all this habit, all this poison, and all of this kind of talk is really about identifying with oneself as the body or the senses or the mind rather than as the self. So, yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Very nice. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Rishi.
Rishi, can I ask you something?
Yes, Atma. I'm happy that you made it into the room. Good.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was traveling. It's actually about the same question you were just referring to about the poison. Because I feel the more sensitive we become, we also sometimes absorb the energies from the people around us. And at times there's just this feeling of wanting to detox. Even the more time we spend with some people, and we know we do absorb some conditioning or some energies or even thought patterns which are not original to us, and then it becomes very sticky. So then how can we just filter out, so that's not original to me, or it does not belong to me, and just not to fall for this poison, which is not only coming from us, but also depending in which environment we are. You can sometimes feel it in the body or even wherever we spend the time. It's going through, but also just to be aware that we don't identify with anything also from other beings.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So, one of the main faculties, if you will, of awakening and knowing ourselves as awakened being, consciousness, and bliss, one of the main faculties that we depend on in the beginning is the faculty of discrimination. So what is meant in the ultimate sense about the faculty of discrimination is that we understand and recognize the difference between what is real and what is unreal. And in this way of understanding, what is real is awareness itself, consciousness, the truth of your own nature as being consciousness and bliss. And what is unreal is essentially everything else, because everything else is based in identification or in misunderstanding of some sort. So one of the things that we can do, especially if we're around a lot of people who aren't aware of our spiritual pursuit and are not aware of their own spiritual nature, one of the things that we can do to make it easier on ourselves is to, of course, limit the amount of time that we spend with people that are not sharing an interest in what is real and who are firmly uh, in the belief that what is unreal is in fact real. But we don't always have the opportunity to do this. We can't always physically move ourselves away. And of course, understand that this is why all of the traditions of India, of the East, all have a strong leaning into these periods of time where we remove ourselves physically from the environments which are not supportive of peace and love and understanding. So we go on retreat, we give ourselves long weekends, we give ourselves permission in some sense to walk away from relationships which are not serving us in an uplifting and peaceful way at that moment. So this is all part of that tradition, and so we welcome the opportunity to walk away. But when we can't walk away, maybe I should say before I even make that statement, part of what we're doing by the physical walking away or giving ourselves the opportunity to go on retreat or to remain silent at home according through an evening, through a weekend, not get on social media, not turn on the television, not watch a movie. What we're doing during that period of time is we're strengthening our ability to sit in the midst of our own realness, you can say, our own natural being. By doing this, we strengthen this ability. Once this ability has reached a certain strength, then it's possible to remain in any environment under any circumstance, because we're able, in the midst of all environment, to remain centered in the heart of being, to know ourselves to be that which is aware in that moment. If we cannot do that, and we find that through our work or through our family associations, we must be involved with people that we don't feel supported or we feel challenge us. Begin to see those opportunities for what they are. They're not the opportunity for you to struggle with an opposing view. They're the opportunity for you to come into the heart of your own being as much as you're able or it's possible for you in that moment, and to simply remain quiet in that circumstance. So we do that in several ways. It's quite possible for any of us to be in an environment where we feel a stress or a tension and still remember to breathe. This is an important thing. Seems like a small thing, but if you really notice what happens when you feel yourself to be in an unpleasant environment, most of us in that way stop our breathing or shallow our breathing. In other words, we're trying to psychically, even energetically, we're trying to stop ourselves from absorbing. So in doing this, we stop our breath. Our body tenses. Our mind clenches. But with practice, with attention on opening our heart, we're able, when the mind clenches, we're able to say, oh, to feel that happening in that moment, Now we are in the here and now. We are in a situation where it feels uncomfortable, but we're also now recognizing this tendency within our own mind through habit, through conditioning, to clench in certain situations. We feel this clenching as a tightness in the mind, as an, an unwillingness to listen or to keep engaging with this person. We experience it as a closing down of the heart, which we then feel as an inability to breathe fully in that circumstance out of fear, concern. We're being challenged. We feel tension in the body wherever we hold it. Some people have a stiff neck, some people have stiff shoulders, some people hold it in their belly. So the simplest way to be in difficult circumstances with when we cannot walk away is to just begin to relax the body, to say, to notice what's happening in the body in that moment. How do we habitually close down? And then to remember that if we simply breathe, we've now moved attention to the breathing back into the center of the body. We open again. It's quite natural. We cannot remain shut down as long as we're breathing. So there are simple techniques that we can use. But I really want to encourage you, and this is more of a permission. Many of us, when we find ourselves around people that we just aren't vibing with in some way, and we don't feel supported in our quest, if you will, or in our understanding of our own loving nature, we don't feel like we can remain open in that situation, then there needs to be a permission that it is, and an understanding that to go into our own silence in our own being, or to simply get up and walk away, to walk out of the room, to leave, to excuse ourselves if we can. We need to be able to give ourselves that permission. It's not necessary when we find ourselves in a particularly challenging or difficult situation for us to somehow force ourselves to stay there out of some false belief that to walk away from a difficult situation is a sign of weakness. Or maybe it's better to say, if you feel that is a sign of weakness, then give yourself permission to incline toward the weakness. Yes? Many times as children and as social beings, we're taught that we must be strong, forceful, all of the things that actually make us feel very uncomfortable. And we're taught that to be kind, gentle, soft, aware, is somehow a weakness. So if that is your nature, I know this to be true of you, then there is a certain kind of a permission that you have to be willing to extend to your own heart, which says that it is okay for you to feel this challenge, to feel this difficulty, to feel this confusion, and to realize that to stay in that is not going to be supportive for you at that moment. And you're certainly not going to convince another person by staying. And so you give yourself permission on some level to incline toward your natural tendency, which for most of us as sadhaks tends to be very quiet and tends to be very almost introverted in a way. And that we have to be willing to allow this natural way of being for us to express itself. And if that means becoming very quiet in order to go inside, relax the body, breathe, open the mind, then we do that. Because it won't do us any good to resist and fight internally. Because even if you're quiet, you may have noticed, even if you're very quiet, Even if you withdraw from the conversation and stay in the room, inside there still is the argument going on. There still is the turmoil going on. So this is not of any benefit to you. It's not of any benefit to the other. So you have to then incline towards your own nature. Oh, I hope that's helpful.
Yes. Thank you.
Part of what we do on this journey into the self is we discover more and more about who we already are. But often it's expressed by people that this journey of discovering who I am and accepting who I am and allowing who I am to be present here now under all sorts of different circumstances feels as though it is in opposition to the dominant way of being in the society or the cultures in which we find ourselves. And I just want to affirm this can absolutely feel like it's true. And it's so for this reason, we have to give ourselves this permission to acknowledge that under certain circumstances, it's in our best interest to remain silent and to walk away. It's possible to be a yogi living in a cave when it's an apartment in a city. So you have to understand the nature of your own being, the nature of your own tendencies, even when they go in opposition to society, or maybe especially when they do. You know, you have to be willing to accept yourself as you are. And then as you begin to accept yourself as you are more and more, you begin to relax, you begin to lose your fear, you begin to settle into yourself as the solitude and the quiet that maybe is your nature. Then you have less argument with what's going on in the environment, with what's going on in the others that are close to you. That argument often is coming out of the refusal to acknowledge who you are, or to accept on a very deep level who you might be. So I just encourage you to keep working on self-acceptance, because self-acceptance allows us to see that the things that often society, parents, teachers, jobs, the characteristics which we have, which we're often told are unacceptable or somehow not useful, because we are a person who is, we've all of us, I think when I say this to all of you, you can relate. All of us have been told we are too quiet, we are too shy, we are too this, we are too that, we are too loving, we are too open, we are too sensitive. We have been told this throughout our entire lives. But when it comes time to look deeply inside, you look deeply inside our own being, these are our assets, these are our allies. This sensitivity, this loving kindness, this generosity that we feel that is often not appreciated in the world, these kinds of characteristics become very, very useful when it comes down to us realizing that all we're doing is simply discriminating between what is real and what is unreal. And that the more loving we are toward ourselves, toward our own nature, helps us to see that the reality of who we are is not in opposition to the unreality of what everyone else is living in. It simply is the recognition that beneath all of the misunderstanding within our own minds, within the minds of all living beings within the world, all that misunderstanding is based in not knowing being, consciousness, and bliss. it's quite okay to know that you're feeling too sensitive at a particular moment, Atmavidya, and walk away just saying, this is not useful right now. This isn't a condemnation of someone else. It's not a judgment of someone else. This is an acknowledgement that this open heart needs to be in a space where it can stay open, not where there's a constant demand to shut it down. And you all know this. This demand comes from society. It comes from our jobs. It comes from, there is this demand that seems to happen. It comes from work. Shut down, shut down, shut down, shut down. Focus on what I want you to focus on. But the heart is interested in openness. So give yourself permission to be in the space, to be with people who support that openness.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank
You are whole and complete and valid just as you are. You don't need to change anything. You only need to understand this question: who am I? As you come to understand who you are, you quite naturally live more and more in the space of your own being. Whether you are in the world or in your cave, until you understand this question, who am I? What is aware here? Until you understand this question, it will make no difference if you're in a cave on a mountain somewhere, because that mind, which is making you pursue the craziness of the world, will be in the cave with you. So when you find yourself in difficult circumstances, physically, mentally, and emotionally, the question to ask yourself, if you have to ask yourself a question at that moment, might be, how can I use this? What am I trying to see here by having this experience? Because there is no other. So whatever experience you are having, if you take it as yourself in a positive way, not in a negative way, in a positive way, through the question, what is occurring here? What is it that I'm to learn from this experience? Then you're able to stand in what's happening, even when it's difficult, to center in the body, in the heart of being, to breathe, to relax, to open in the circumstances. And in that situation, there may come just a spontaneous realization that you need to get up and walk out. And if that happens, just let that happen. This is a way to honor yourself. So everything that you have in the power of your own recognition is there to help you to understand who you are, not who you are as a personality, but who you are as awareness itself. How can I use this? It's another form of the inquiry, but one which often works quite good when we're actually in the world, we're having experiences, we're doing our work, we're doing our interactions with other people that we necessarily wouldn't be involved with them, except that life requires that we be involved with them at that moment. So in order to remain loving, open, and compassionate, even in a difficult circumstances. The question then becomes, and how can I use this for awakening? Continually come back over and over to the recognition that you really are only doing one thing here, and that is coming to understand your awakened nature. That is all you are ever doing. Doesn't matter whether you're at work, you're at home, you're out around town, you're in your cave, you're at Arunachala. You're always only doing one thing, awakening. That is it. Your commitment by being here today and by coming back over and over is just to continuously remind yourself that you have given it all up for the sake of awakening. So do it now. Use everything. Nothing is separate. There's nothing you cannot use. Make everyone your guru. Make every circumstance your guru.
Thank you so much.
Only to learn this one truth, the difference between what is real and what is unreal. In reality, you are truth. Every other belief you hold is unreal. Be kind, be loving, remain open. Those that are in your world, those that are sharing this moment with you, are deserving of your love and your kindness. Your attention and your longing for truth. All circumstances, all people are part of your quest to understand I am already free. Om Triambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanam Mrityor Mukshiyamamritawa Swaha Uva U Om Sat Jun Hum Om. Thank you for being here today. It's a joy to see you all, to spend time with you, to feel your love, your kindness.